Hey, welcome back to Pastoral Apologetics, and I want to answer a question that I've gotten from Christians, I've gotten from Jewish friends as they want to understand Christianity, and that is why Christians don't observe the Sabbath in the same way that Jews do. So, in answering that question, let's first talk about what the Sabbath is. It's a day off, but it's more than a day off. It is a reminder that Israel was freed from slavery. It was a reminder of their redemption. A couple of things that are important to know. The first is that Israel was the first nation to operate out of a 7-day week. The second is that Israel was the first nation to ever take a regular day off. In fact, even if you'll fast forward from maybe the time of the Exodus, fast forward 1,500 years to the time of the Romans. The Romans called Jews lazy because Jews wouldn't work 7 days a week like the Romans did. So this is, once again, this is a totally original concept. So in defining Sabbath, let's define what the word means. The word Sabbath means to stop or to cease. It is the stopping of regular work for some other purpose. And so the command is to remember the Sabbath. Now, we think of remember in terms of remember and don't forget. But it has another meaning. In fact, I love the late, great Tim Keller would explain it this way, that when you think about remember, think about the opposite. The opposite of remember is to dismember. And that is, to remember then would be to graft something onto your body that was not there or had been lost. So to remember the Sabbath is to add this thing into your life and realize that your worth is not based on what you do. When they were slaves in Egypt, that's what their worth was based on. How many bricks can you bake? And now it's based on God's love for you beyond anything that you can do. And so every week was this reminder that people were loved by God regardless of what they produce. And so it led to the question of what constitutes work. And so Jewish scholars had to answer the question, what constitutes work, so people wouldn't disobey God. And so they came up with an answer, and it was 24 chapters long in the Mishnah. So if you're not familiar with the Mishnah is the oral law. These are all of the law. Moses was given the written law, but according to Jewish tradition, Moses was also given the oral law, which was passed down. Eventually, it was written down in a series of books that are called the Mishnah. Now, how did they make sure that they were keeping the oral law? And that is by adhering to another book, which is called the Talmud. It's actually a multi-volume set of books, which are all the interpretations that are given by the rabbis. And so, here's how these things work together. The Torah says to rest on the Sabbath. What does it mean to rest? What can you do or not do? The Mishnah, the oral law, contains 39 activities that you cannot be involved in on the Sabbath. One of them is lifting heavy things. But you got to ask the question, what constitutes a heavy thing? And so the Talmud can help with that. And then the rabbis debated and argued, and they came up with the resolution that anything heavier than 2 figs was considered carrying a heavy burden. So a person couldn't look in the mirror, according to the Talmud, on the Sabbath because they might see a gray hair that they want to pluck out. A person could walk up to 3/4 of a mile because one step beyond that, they would break into a sweat, and that became known as, which you read in the New Testament, a Sabbath day's walk. And so in answering the question about the Sabbath, and I'm trying to give you a little bit of background, the first thing that we have to understand is that the Sabbath is Friday at sundown until Saturday at sundown. That's the Sabbath. Now, there's people that talk about Sunday being the Christian Sabbath. No, not, and that's not exactly how that works. The early Christians weren't trying to change the Sabbath. The early Christians worshiped on Sunday because it's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So, by the way, we don't just celebrate the resurrection on Easter. We celebrate the resurrection every Sunday when God's people get together to worship. And so Christians weren't trying to hijack the Sabbath and move it from Saturday to Sunday. The Sabbath is Friday night to Saturday night. It has always been that. It will always continue to be that. And so now, so why don't Christians observe the Sabbath like Jews do? First, The New Testament repeats every command of the Ten Commandments, some of them multiple times, except for the Sabbath. And it's important to know that the Sabbath was more than just a day. The Sabbath was baked into the culture of Israel. It was a culture of redemption. Not only every 7 days was the Sabbath, every 7 years in Jewish culture, they were told to celebrate a Sabbath year. And then there was another cycle of 7 cycles of 7 years, or every 49 years. And then the 50th year was the Jubilee. You got the year off and all debts were canceled. And so this is all part of a culture of redemption and freedom that God is establishing. Now, Jesus observed the Sabbath. And although, of course, there were times when Jesus did not agree with the oral traditions that some of the religious leaders kept, and like famously in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2, he says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And Jesus was telling the leaders, the religious leaders, that their additional rules were killing the spirit by which the command was given. It was about giving God's people rest, and they were turning it into a job. And the point is this: the Sabbath was about resting, but through their laws, they had turned the rest into work, and they were missing the blessing that it was supposed to be. And somehow, they had turned a day that was supposed to be about rest and knowing that you were loved and valued into a show about how good I am and look how close I keep it. But the goal of Sabbath was simple: don't work. That's it. Whatever you do for a living, do something else that's life-giving 1 day a week. And so the Sabbath was remembering that Israel had been freed. It was remembering their redemption. In Christ, Jesus is our redemption, and the Sabbath was meant to be a picture of the ultimate redemption that would be found in Jesus. In the book of Colossians, Paul writes, "Therefore, don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, with regard to religious festival, new moon celebration, or Sabbath day. These are the shadow of things to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ." And by the way, there's groups who say that if you don't worship on Saturday, you're sinning. One group says if you don't worship on Saturday, you're taking the mark of the beast. That's a little strong. But see, the thing is, the Bible never says to worship on the Sabbath. It says to rest on the Sabbath. Why? Because the Son of Man, according to Matthew 12, Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Ultimately, the Sabbath is about Jesus, and it is a picture of the redemption and the rest that's found in him. Hope that's been helpful to you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. And once again, if these videos are helpful, I would encourage you to like and share and do all the things that people do to let people know so that they can get some answers to the questions that they have. So we look forward to seeing you in the next video, and until then, keep reading.